What is up, guys? So I want to actually make a video highlighting some of the work I'm doing. This is a Series 5 RX-7 harness, and this is for a Link Monsoon G4X ECU. This is what it was wired for. I'll just go over a little spec sheet here. So this is actually for a Series 5 6-port turbo RX-7. Stock crank angle sensor, wipers, EV14 injectors like ID injectors, Series 5 TPS, Series 5 BAC Valve, AEM Wideband, electronic boost control, LS Ignition Coils, GM Coolant Temp sensor, GM intake air temp sensor, electric fan control, 2-speed, and yeah, so I'll just go over this harness here. This is the plug for the ECU, so this will plug directly in the Link Monsoon ECU. And then we have some spare I/O for the customer that we didn't end up using, like some digital inputs if you ever wanted to add anything like anti-lag and stuff like that. And one of those is for the wideband signal for the customer to wire in. So they'll just wire their AEM wideband to the ECU if they want to do so for closed loop mixture maps and other features that are built into the ECU with a lambda signal. And then if we move up here, this is a pretty important connector. So this connector here is responsible for powering the whole harness from the chassis. So on this end, we have fuel pump control. We have the ECU controlling the coolant temp to the cluster. This is something I like to do now. So that top wire is fuel pump control, bottom cluster. We have our wipers wired in here, and then power to various places such as our boost control, boost controller, fan control, injectors, ECU, and things like that. And then as we move up here, it's pretty cool. So this connector here is for our boost controller. This connector here, the red wire is switched 12 volts, and then those two are output wires for electric fan control. So we could have 1 speed and then 2 speed, and then this red wire will be wired to either pin 85 or pin 86 of the electric fan relay. So that's pretty cool. We have our wiper plug. So this is to retain the stock wipers from the factory. RX-7s have the wiper harness is integrated into the engine harness. So we retain wipers on the harness here. If we move up over here, as we move up in the harness, there's a couple things to note. So we labeled a lot of what's going on here. So we have our ignition sub harness over here. So 4 ignition outputs, 2 grounds for the these green wires here, 2 grounds for the ignition coils. I use pure grounds, so we don't use signal grounds on the harnesses as they can be very disruptive. So a pure ground to the keg is always kind of the best way to go when it comes to this. And then we have our tachometer signal, which is all of this lives on the ignition harness. So this one plug will plug in and you get ignition, which is awesome. We have our coolant temp sensor. So this is for a GM coolant temp sensor. I run these on all RX-7s. It's a direct plug and play, no tapping is needed, and it threads right in. I believe it's like M12 by 1.25 or M12 by 1.5. So that sensor, it's fast and responsive, so we always use that. You don't want a slow and responsive sensor like the stock sensor because you want the ECU to compensate if needed right away. Over here we have our crank angle sensor signal. So as you can see here, this is wired for a stock CAS. We have our grounds. So I terminated this for the customer to put whatever ring terminals they want. You can just merge these all together and put them on a ring terminal as so. We have our BAC. So this is our idle air control valve. So we're retaining that. And as you can see, this very long one, this is our throttle position sensor. The reason why I make them pretty long is because people end up changing their intake setups and things like that. So we'll typically keep the TPS pretty long. So as you can see, this is our TPS signal. Series 5s have 2 sensors in them, but we end up using the full range sensor on all standalone installations, as the narrow band or the low range sensor is no longer needed when going with a standalone solution. Over here, we have our injectors. So all these are labeled. So if you look, secondary 1, so secondary front, secondary rear, primary rear P2, primary front P1. So these are wired for EV14 injectors. The best of the best for honestly any rotary. I wouldn't really run any other injector. It's kind of like a must whenever you're doing any sort of modifications that require some power. If you just want good fuel economy, consistency, not worrying about flooding or clogging up, these are the style injectors you want to run, Bosch EV14 styles. We have a intake air temp sensor. So this will go right before the throttle body, obviously to read the amount of heat that's coming into the engine air-wise. And lastly, I have this terminated for the customer. So it says AN3, that's called AN Vault 3 on the link. And this is just terminated if they want to add an additional sensor, such as an external map sensor, fuel pressure, oil temp, oil pressure. So that's left aside for the customer to add that if they wanted to add any additional sensors. But this is typically what you get with a bare bones harness. And yeah, I'm pretty happy with how this turned out, and hopefully I can make more videos highlighting this kind of stuff. But shout out, I love doing FC harnesses. This is kind of like the tried and true formula for developing, for making a pretty good harness with the essentials and all the bare basics. I wouldn't run any less sensors than this, I'll say that. But yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed this video, and let me know what you guys want to see.